Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be talking about an album I really like. That's what I've decided to do this week. I've decided to talk about some albums I really like. Some of the albums will be albums I've played on, and other albums will be albums that I just love, especially those albums which I cannot talk about on this channel because they don't quite fit in. As you can see, I've got some Stravinsky behind me, and if I just move my head, we've got a little bit of Ravel there. And we all love that, and I don't get to talk about that on this channel. But I'm not going to be talking about classical music. I'm not going to be talking about Ravel. What I'm going to be talking about is a band from the 2000s called The Feeling that made one of my favourite albums of all time. I'm going to be talking a little bit about how that relates to two other bands, yes, and a little bit about ELO and a few other bands. But let me get into an introduction to this album. So I think this album came out in 2006. It's by a band called The Feeling. It's called 12 Stops and Home. I think this album, I'm going to stick my neck out right away, I think this is one of the greatest albums made by a British band. I think its strength is the songwriting. We haven't talked a lot about songwriting on this channel that much, but I am a big fan of songwriting, and I think in recent times songwriting has taken a hit. So here is an album from sort of 16 years ago which is full of absolutely incredible songwriting, and I believe the songwriting on this album is as strong as any Beatles or Simon and Garfunkel or Elton John album. This is some incredible songwriting. I put the album on in the car just to check that I wasn't just being over the top, and I've had it on the car and I couldn't switch it off. And actually consciously studying what's going on in the songwriting, I've been able to uncover some really incredible techniques and approaches, and a virtuosity and ability of the part of the whole band to really craft incredible tracks that suggest so much more than they deliver, which I think is a very important quality in songwriting. So this was made in 2006. So this is going to be a very personal video about this album. I'm assuming that the people who like this channel and they like the fusion and the prog that I cover and they like my take, and a lot of people come in and say, oh, I love these albums, it's identical to my record collection, all that. Maybe you haven't listened to this album, but maybe you'll check it out and you'll hopefully some of you will love it as much as I do. So where do we start with this? Many years ago, I'm driving along in my car, and I put the radio on, and Owner of a Lonely Heart comes on by Yes. All right? Now, Yes, in the 70s, were one of the greatest progressive rock bands, and they were almost a progressive rock band by default. Now, what I mean by that is that I believe that John Anderson was a genius at coming up with incredibly highly packed short vocal melodies that just packed such a punch, were so beautiful, but that's what he had. What the band couldn't do was forge those short melodic phrases into full songs like a Joni Mitchell would, or a Simon and Garfunkel, or an Elton John. You have these short melodic fractions, maybe a verse, maybe two lines. Yes, to start off with, sort of, they flap around in this approach, having to rely on a lot of cover versions to bolster up their songwriting. I think once Steve Howe joins the band, there's an arrangement skill that develops, where Yes suddenly realise that by putting these phrases into different musical contexts and joining them together using like classical techniques, they can create something which is as powerful as a song. This is why I've always questioned Yes's compositional process. I think it came out of necessity to do this. This creates some incredible pieces of music in the 70s. As time goes on, Yes do their pure normal songwriting develops, and I think by going for the one, if you listen to Wondrous Stories, they've written some nice songs there. But in the 80s, with the addition of Trevor Rabin brings in a great pop sensibility with Owner of a Lonely Heart. Now we suddenly have incredible guitar hooks, we have some incredible vocal hooks, and having the two vocalists there, rather than have John Anderson's voice, you know, appearing in different contexts, they're able to have a verse and then, you know, John Anderson's incredible yes-like, you know, melody. And on Owner of a Lonely Heart, this really comes into his own, you know. So we have this song about the attributes of being lonely, right? An owner of a lonely heart is much better than an owner of a broken heart, right? Think about that meaning there. And then that's punctuated with John Anderson doing his yes thing and singing about being an eagle flying and all that type of stuff. And those two things together, there's the very sort of common sense, earthy, normal pop song, albeit the opposite of what you'd expect, like the, you know, it's good to be on your own, is then balanced by this sort of ethereal, you know, metaphysical John Anderson thing. And I think that comes together to create a great song. But this song is the great song about individuality, all right? We have this image of the eagle flying, right, over its own domain. The eagle is lonely, and it's a positive thing that the eagle's lonely. It's championing the autonomy of being the author of yourself and not having that clouded by attachments to other people and being able to focus, you know. And I think that's what that song's about. So I think as much as the Yes fans here won't like it, Only the Lonely Heart actually represents Yes in terms of songwriting at their peak, right? Different to appreciating prog, different to appreciating fusion. We have to appreciate songwriting in a different way. We have to really see that as a balance of certain things. It's the balance of form and content. It's the balance of the lyrics and what they're about. And in terms of that, there may be an internal balance between those lyrics, which I think we have with Owner of a Lonely Heart. And it's the balance of the content, the lyrics, with the form, the music. Music is very emotional, right? But if you go too much into emotionalism, it just simply becomes a roller coaster ride, right? It becomes a drugs overdose. It's pure pleasure without any meaning. Is a roller coaster ride can be very enjoyable. Is that art? No, it's not. Art is when these two things are in balance. And in great songwriting, these are locked together and they really form a concise whole where every aspect is balancing every other one. You know, songwriters will agonize over this, you know, to try and make sure that everything is counterweighted. You know, I'll give you an example of great songwriting. If you think of Highway to Hell by AC/DC, that lyric at the start, when Bon Scott comes in, he does two short lines balanced by a long line. Living easy, living free, living on a one-way ride, asking nothing, leave me be. That is genius. If you listen to sort of much more mediocre songwriting, it won't be that sort of structure. That's where AC/DC has shown their genius of being able to balance those two short ones with a longer one, being able to balance the content of the verse with the content of the chorus, you know, understanding where your hooks are and being able to develop a hook as you go through the song. So the hook isn't just blurted out straight away, you know, that we are teased the hook and go, oh, I like that, I want the hook, give me more of the hook. All right, we're going to have more of the hook here, but I take it away. It's all about that with great songwriting. And so, anyway, I'm driving along my car and the radio comes on and Owner of a Lonely Heart comes on. And I'm thinking, this is fantastic songwriting. This is, yes, really proving that they can write an absolutely world-class song. And then straight after that comes the second track off this album, which I've never heard before. Don't know the feeling. This track comes on. Never Be Lonely. And this... and maybe it was clever programming on behalf of on the part of the radio show, I don't know, or maybe it was just a fluke, but it did strike me, this did. Because here was an incredible song about being autonomous and being on your own, of being an owner of a lonely heart, being better than an owner of a broken heart. And then the following song had this chorus of never be lonely. Never be lonely. You know, how this person is the opposite. And those two things together had ramifications. And I remember listening to this Feeling song and going, the songwriting process here, the way they have created this structure on this song is as great, if perhaps even greater, than the Yes song. This song comes in with a very hooky melody right at the start. It draws you in with a hooky melody, right? With modern pop songs, that would be the song. We've got a hooky melody, we'll just kick it through. But they don't. They take you into the verse, and the verse starts to tell you a story about this person's situation. And that moves up to what we could call a chorus, where he mentions the fact that he doesn't want to be lonely. We only get it once, right? And at that point, it does a very clever thing. It just changes and almost goes into a completely different song. A staccato piano comes in, and we're in a different world. And he's in a different agitated state with someone else, right? And that builds up into almost like another song, which then goes back. We hear the Never Lonely hook again. That Never Be Lonely hook is teased again. We then go towards a bunch of modulations, and the track it almost sort of spins around a few keys and lands us back. We feel the dizziness. Is it the dizziness of being in love, or is it the dizziness of the angst of not being in love and being desperate for someone? And then right at the end, it drops down, and we get this sort of beautiful, almost like Beach Boys, Never Be Lonely. They then give you that hook, Never Be Lonely, all the way to the end of the song. And I remember thinking, this is a really brilliantly crafted song, absolutely brilliantly delivered. And so I went and bought the album. And what you have here, this album, is almost proggy and conceptual. It really represents, I think, metropolitan life for young people in the big city, and the disconnection that has, the feeling of being in a big place, not surrounded by anybody that you really know, trying to create connections. And throughout the whole album, it explores different aspects to that. It's almost like a day in the city. And then right at the end, we have Blue Piccadilly, which is really about him returning home. And there's the title, 12 Stops and Home. The idea of going home, the idea of being a young person and leaving, going out into the world and trying to survive there, and the troubles and angst that causes, and the yearning to go back home where there's some sort of groundings and stability. There's a very proggy moment. Well, there's a number of very proggy moments on this. The musicians on this album are very, very, very good. And I can vouch for this personally, as I'll get onto in a minute. And they point at all sorts of things. This is very light pop, very vocal. We're channeling ELO. We're channeling Supertramp, 10cc, all that type of really great songwriting. But every now and then they'll point. There's a chord change which is very Jan Hammery for me. There's a bit where it goes really heavy metal and we get a shredding guitar solo. There's these little points. And right at the end of the night, if you imagine this is a day, we end up right at the end of the album with a sort of small quiet party, the sort of party you would have in a flat in London when you can't afford to go out. And that party dies away, and we hear Dan, the lead singer, the main protagonist on this album, he sort of shouts everybody goodbye, and then he shuts the door and he walks to his piano and he starts playing his piano, and this absolutely gorgeous orchestral piece comes out where he is thinking about somebody. What are they doing now? Where are they? It's all about yearning. It's the polar opposite of what Owner of a Lonely Heart is about. Right. I have tried to champion this as much as I can in this video. But before I go, many years after becoming a fan of this album, I got invited to a drum expo by Tama Drums. And I was looking at some cymbals with this other drummer, and we started chatting, and I said, are you in a band? And he said, yeah, I'm in a band. I drum for The Feeling. And I was like, oh my God, this is one of my favourite bands. An incredible drummer called Paul Stewart. I'm not in contact with him now, but Paul, if you're watching, please get in touch. AndyEdwardsDrums@gmail.com. I'd love to have a chat with you, and I've tried to champion my love for your band on this video. And we got chatting, and we stayed in touch. And I was very lucky to oversee a recording session with Paul on drums. And I can vouch that this guy was an incredible drummer with incredible groove. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about this album. Is as much as it's a song-based album and it's about the stories of the song, all the way through the musicianship is incredible. Paul Stewart, on many occasions, his drum fills act as full stops and commas to what the singer's singing. This is high-end music, and I feel this is lacking from modern songwriting. And I think part of that is because we don't have bands anymore. We don't have people in a room trying their songs out and having great musicians being able to add all this stuff live. And even if you then go into the studio and recreate that process has happened. So what you end up with is multifaceted songs with lots of different parts, with lots of different choruses, with lots of different hooks. And this holds your interest. What we have nowadays so often is 4 chords and a catchy hook for the whole song. So I'm a champion of songwriting. I wanted to talk about songwriting. I thought, shall I talk about Simon and Garfunkel or Elton John? And I thought, I'm going to talk about the feeling. Let's stick my neck out. I think this is one of the great songs, one of the great British songwriting albums of all time. I'm sure some of you are going to absolutely love this album. There may be even some people here that already love it. So let's have some love for this album in the comments. And I will finish up there. Thanks for watching this video. If you like, then like it, and if you want to subscribe. If you want to support me in this, I've been doing a lot of top 10 videos recently, and that's been getting a lot of views. This week I have gone a little bit more esoteric, and I'm talking about some much more on the fringe stuff. We're talking about pop albums from the 2000s. You know, I haven't said how huge this band was back in 2006 when this album came out. It really was the biggest band of that year, and it's a shame that our structures that are out there now do not look after those bands in the same way as we look after the great legacy bands like Oasis and, you know, U2 and the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, because I do believe this is one of the great bands of all time. I've said it there. Hope you like. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching. And of course, if you want to support me doing this, and I need support if you want to be talking about this more esoteric stuff, please become a Patreon. There's a whole ton of content there. I've just recently done an 8-episode, nearly 3-hour discussion on the history of jazz fusion. That's all there for my patrons. So thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video, and goodbye.